by scratching the surface, you get a terrible shock. It's a heinous crime. People are so shocked by what...
The message reached Camilla without warning, sealed inside a dark leather folder carrying the private mark of Prince Philip. Within minutes, the woman who had spent years securing her place beside the throne learned that every royal residence she considered part of her life was now beyond her reach. Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, Sandringham, Balmoral, each door had been closed by a command written years before she ever became queen. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not move. She read the first page twice, pressed her fingers against the edge of the table, and asked the senior royal secretary whether Charles had already seen it. The decree, an official written command carrying binding authority, did far more than deny her a bedroom. It barred her from residing in, privately occupying, or claiming personal quarters inside the principal homes belonging to the crown. Those buildings represented legitimacy, continuity, privacy, and belonging. She could still enter for selected duties, yet she could never treat them as home. Charles stood near the fireplace with the full document in his hand. He had defended their marriage through scandal, judgment, and years of public resistance, but now his father's voice seemed to reach across time and place, a boundary even the king could not easily erase or safely challenge without consequence. He lowered his eyes, set the pages down, and said nothing. That silence wounded her more than any legal phrase. She had expected anger, protection, perhaps even defiance. Instead, the monarch looked trapped between the woman beside him and the authority of the man who had shaped him. The signature made everything worse. Philip had signed the order before his death, secured witnesses, and attached it to a protected royal estate arrangement, meaning it could not be dismissed like a private letter or an emotional final request. Buckingham Palace appeared first. Windsor Castle followed. Then came Sandringham House, Balmoral Castle, and the sovereign's private apartments. Each residence had been named separately, leaving no room for symbolism, misunderstanding, or convenient reinterpretation. Camilla reached the final paragraph and felt the room tighten around her. Philip had offered no explanation inside the decree itself. Instead, he referred to a separate sealed memorandum, a confidential written account preserving his reasons, known only to 3 members of the family. Charles looked up at that line. She watched his expression change and understood that the closed doors were only the beginning. But before the palace could understand why Philip had closed every door, Camilla had to face the people whose lives and loyalties were now trapped inside his final command. For Charles, the decree was more than an attack on his wife's position. It was the voice of his father reaching across time, forcing him to choose between the woman beside him and the family authority that had shaped him since childhood. For Camilla, the humiliation cut even deeper. She had gained the crown, yet in the private world of the monarchy, she had suddenly been told she did not belong. Camilla carried that humiliation into her dressing room and closed the door behind her. She removed the palace access card from her handbag, placed it carefully on the table, and stared at it as if it belonged to someone else. The card had once meant private entry, trusted access, and a place within the royal household. Now it felt like a reminder that every privilege could be withdrawn. When her secretary quietly asked whether she wanted the rooms formally contested, the queen consort answered that she would not beg to sleep in buildings where Philip had decided she was unwelcome. Charles tried to steady the situation over breakfast, but every word sounded weaker than the last. He reminded her that official duties would continue, and that the decree did not remove her ceremonial standing. Ceremonial standing meant her recognized public place beside the sovereign during royal duties, but Camilla heard only what had been taken away. She interrupted him and asked whether she could truly call herself queen if she had to leave every palace when the final guest departed. The king looked down at his untouched coffee. He had defended their relationship for decades, yet accepting the order made her privately excluded, while challenging it risked turning his father's final judgment into a public family war. William read the decree without changing expression. He reached the final page, paused, and asked whether the sealed memorandum had been opened. The memorandum was a confidential written explanation attached to Philip's command, and his careful question suggested he already understood the danger hidden inside it. Catherine watched him lower the document and noticed how deliberately he chose his next words. The prince said the order could not simply be destroyed because it affected the future meaning of royal property. Those residences were held as symbols of inherited duty, not prizes that marriage automatically granted. Anne entered the discussion with the calmest voice and the heaviest responsibility. Philip had named her custodian of the supporting papers, making her the temporary guardian required to protect his intent until the conditions for disclosure were met. She refused Charles's demand for an immediate legal challenge and rejected Camilla's insistence that the decree be removed. William argued that it had to be respected. The monarch wanted it examined. His wife wanted it gone. Catherine could already feel the family dividing around a document none of them had written. Then Anne revealed, through the written account her father had left in her custody, that his decision had begun with one specific incident the family had avoided discussing for years. And the incident Anne remembered had not occurred in a courtroom or council chamber. It had unfolded during one unforgettable night inside Windsor Castle. Years before the decree surfaced, a private confrontation at Windsor Castle changed Philip's view of Camilla forever. It happened after a formal family dinner, when the corridors had emptied and the household believed the evening was over. One conversation, one disputed room, and one sentence spoken behind a closed door convinced him that the future of the royal residences needed protection long after he was gone. Philip had always treated royal homes as more than places of comfort. To the Duke, they were working institutions held in trust, meaning they were protected for the service of the crown rather than owned for personal pleasure. Their rooms carried history, duty, and the memory of those who had served before. That was why Camilla's growing requests unsettled him. She had asked about redesigning private suites, moving trusted household staff, and reserving historic rooms for her use once Charles became king. Each request seemed small alone. Together, they began to look like a claim. The breaking point came after a Windsor state dinner. Camilla remained behind and privately instructed a household official to prepare Queen Elizabeth's former East Wing apartment as her permanent suite for the next reign. A state dinner was a formal royal banquet held for important guests, but the real drama began after the ceremony ended. No approval had been given. Even so, fabric samples, floor plans, and staffing notes were already spread across the table when Philip entered without warning. Camilla turned and immediately understood that he had seen everything. Philip asked who had given her permission to claim Elizabeth's private rooms. She held her ground and answered that the future would require new arrangements. The Duke removed his glasses, folded the plans slowly, and told her that marriage to the heir did not grant ownership over the monarchy's memory. The words landed harder than anger. Camilla did not respond, but he saw the defiance in her silence and carried the papers away himself. Philip acted before the family could soften what had happened. The next morning, he summoned his private solicitor and dictated the first version of the residence restriction. A private solicitor was a lawyer trusted to handle confidential family and property matters, and this one recorded every instruction exactly. Anne later confirmed through her father's documented account that she had been called in as witness. The decree was ordered to remain dormant until Camilla attempted to establish permanent palace occupancy. Anne then revealed that the Windsor confrontation was only the trigger. Philip later added a sealed memorandum explaining what he feared would happen if her influence over royal property continued unchecked. That hidden explanation carried a warning far more serious than the loss of rooms. When Anne finally brought that explanation into the open, Camilla did not retreat. She demanded a confrontation with everyone standing between her and the palace doors. The confrontation took place behind the locked doors of the king's private library. No press officers, no household staff, no advisors to soften the language. Camilla entered carrying Philip's decree and placed it directly in front of Anne. Then, with Charles and William watching, she demanded that the princess look her in the eye and explain why a dead man's judgment should control the life of a living queen. Charles had ordered the room cleared because palace machinery could no longer protect them from the truth. Only 4 people remained, and every silence now carried meaning. Anne sat beside the sealed memorandum, the confidential written explanation attached to Philip's command, while Camilla stood across from her with years of resentment burning beneath every word. The king watched his wife push the folder forward. William stayed near the table, knowing that once the argument began, no title could hide the family beneath it. Camilla asked whether the decree truly protected the crown or simply punished her for a past the family had never forgiven. She reminded Anne that she had endured public hatred, private humiliation, and decades of suspicion to remain beside Charles. The queen consort had reached the highest position of her life, yet Philip's order reduced that victory to a boundary she could not cross. She demanded an answer without ceremony, without careful palace language, and without the shield of duty. Anne did not rise. She kept her hand beside the memorandum and said the restriction was never about affection, popularity, or marriage. Philip's documented account showed that he feared Camilla would eventually confuse closeness to the monarch with ownership of the institution itself. The princess told her that royal residences belonged to the continuity of the crown, not to the emotional victories of those who entered the family. Camilla's face hardened, but she did not look away. Charles suddenly reached for the sealed papers. Anne placed her hand over them before he could lift the file. The gesture froze the room. For the first time, she had physically stopped her brother from acting as sovereign, not out of rebellion, but because her duty as custodian required her to protect their father's instruction. The king stared at her hand. She stared back. William finally broke the silence. He explained that Charles could control schedules, staff, and official household arrangements, but he could not casually erase a protected estate instruction tied to family trusts. Those trusts were legal structures created to preserve property under specific conditions. Overriding them would trigger a formal dispute involving trustees and senior advisors, exposing the family conflict far beyond that locked room. Camilla rose slowly and turned toward her husband. She told him that silence was no longer neutrality. Before walking away, she asked whether he intended to defend his wife or preserve his father's final verdict. Charles now had the crown, but the power controlling Camilla's future was scattered among documents, trustees, family loyalties, and one decision he could not make alone. The crown may sit on one head, but the monarchy's deepest decisions are rarely held by one pair of hands. Behind Philip's decree stood estate trustees, private legal instruments, historic property rules, and members of the family who believed protecting the institution sometimes required resisting the sovereign himself. As Charles searched for a way around the restriction, he discovered that being king did not mean every locked door answered to his command. Charles entered the small council room expecting options. Instead, a senior advisor placed the protected papers before him and explained that Philip had tied the residence restriction to private estate arrangements and occupancy conditions. These were rules governing how certain royal homes could be used, not merely a father's personal request. The king controlled ceremonies, staff, and public duties, but trustees, estate administrators, Anne's custodianship, and William's future interest formed a network of authority that even he could not simply sweep aside. Charles rubbed his wedding ring as the advisor delivered the hardest part. Overturning the decree would require him to reject Philip's stated purpose in writing, creating a formal dispute that could expose the family's private division to senior officials and legal guardians. He asked whether there was any quiet alternative. The answer came slowly. There was no clean escape, only a narrow exception. The decree allowed Camilla to enter royal residences for official ceremonies, state functions, and duties approved by the sovereign. A state function was a formal event carried out on behalf of the crown, and under that condition, she could still stand beside Charles in public. But the wording remained merciless. She could not claim permanent rooms, private residential possession, or the right to treat those palaces as home. She could serve inside them. She simply could not belong to them. Anne stayed behind after the meeting ended. She ran her thumb across her father's signature and admitted to William that enforcing his wishes no longer felt like loyalty. It felt like delivering a wound Philip never had to witness. The princess had protected the memorandum exactly as instructed, yet now she could see the damage moving through her brother's marriage. The prince answered that ignoring the order would wound the institution instead. Neither of them sounded certain that duty made the choice less cruel. William then opened the final page and found the warning Philip had left for Charles. The documented memorandum stated that his son might try to reinterpret the decree out of love. To prevent that, he had separated Camilla's official role from her private access with deliberate care. She could serve the crown without claiming its homes. Charles closed the file, but the machinery had already begun moving. Palace officials received instructions to remove Camilla's private belongings from Windsor and cancel preparations for her seasonal rooms at Balmoral. The decree had existed as ink and argument, until the first wardrobe was emptied, the first key was collected, and Camilla saw exactly what exclusion looked like. The fallout began quietly. There was no public announcement and no ceremonial humiliation. Instead, palace staff arrived with inventory sheets, protective cases, and instructions written in careful administrative language. By afternoon, Camilla's clothes had disappeared from Windsor, her photographs had been removed from the bedside table, and the private rooms prepared for her future had been returned to the crown as though she had never been expected to live there. Camilla arrived before the staff had finished. Two attendants were wrapping a framed photograph of Charles when she entered, and both stopped the moment they saw her. She took the frame from their hands, pressed it against her chest, and told them to continue. Palace administrators had suspended every residential arrangement connected to her, revoked her overnight access, and reclassified the rooms as official guest accommodation. That meant the space could host visitors of the crown, but it could no longer belong to her as a permanent private suite. The loss cut deeper because her public position remained untouched. Camilla could still attend banquets, receptions, investitures, and ceremonial events beside the king. An investiture was a formal ceremony in which honors were presented, and she could continue appearing at such duties with full rank. Yet, when the final guest departed, and the official role ended, she would have to leave for Clarence House, or another approved residence outside the protected palace network. She could stand at the center of royal life by day, and be sent away from it by night. Camilla walked into the emptied bedroom and sat on the bare edge of the mattress. Pale marks remained where photographs and personal objects had stood. Her anger finally gave way to grief. During a private telephone conversation with her sister, she admitted that becoming queen had made her feel more temporary, not less. The title had raised her before the world, but Philip's decree had stripped away the one thing she believed would prove she truly belonged. The household comptroller approached with one final request. He was the senior official responsible for managing the royal household, and he asked for her private Windsor key. Camilla closed her fingers around it and held on for several seconds. Then she placed it into his open palm without looking at him. Charles's signature appeared at the bottom of the removal order. He had not written the decree, but he had authorized its enforcement while the legal review continued. Camilla read his name twice and understood that pleading with him again would change nothing. She chose a different path. Through a private request delivered by her secretary, she asked William to meet without advisors. The future king might not overturn Philip's command, but he could decide what it would mean in the years ahead. When William agreed to meet her without advisors, the conflict finally moved beyond Philip's memory and into a brutally honest conversation about the monarchy's future. There were no lawyers in the room when Camilla met William. No secretaries took notes, and no royal titles were spoken. They sat opposite each other in a private drawing room with the doors closed, carrying decades of grief, resentment, loyalty, and unfinished family history. Camilla had come to persuade him to weaken Philip's decree. Instead, the future king forced her to confront what she was truly fighting to possess. William understood why the meeting mattered. As heir, he would one day inherit responsibility for how royal residences were protected, used, and remembered. His interpretation could turn the decree into a permanent act of rejection, or a strict boundary that still allowed dignity. With no aides, legal files, or prepared statements between them, neither could hide behind royal protocol, the formal rules that usually control how members of the family speak and act. Camilla spoke first. She admitted that losing the rooms hurt, but the deeper wound was being judged forever as an intruder. She was not afraid of having nowhere to live. Clarence House still offered security, privacy, and comfort. What frightened her was the belief that the family would always see her presence as something endured rather than accepted. She had stood beside Charles through scandal and public anger, yet one sealed command had made decades of loyalty feel temporary. William chose his words carefully. He acknowledged that she had remained beside his father through years of scrutiny, and that her service could not simply be erased. But palaces, he said, could not become proof that one person had defeated the memory of another. The prince refused to let royal rooms be used to rewrite pain, claim emotional victory, or erase the history that existed before her arrival. Camilla listened without interrupting, even when his meaning became impossible to misunderstand. Then William offered a path she had not expected. He would not challenge Philip's decree, but he would support her full ceremonial standing, dedicated official offices, and a clearly recognized private residence outside the protected palace network. Ceremonial standing meant her formal public rank and place beside the sovereign would remain secure. She would still serve, host, represent, and be acknowledged. She simply would not possess the rooms at the center of the dispute. Camilla remained silent for a long moment. Then she closed her copy of the decree and said she would stop seeking permanent palace quarters. In return, the family must publicly respect her service and never present her departure as humiliation or disgrace. William agreed and promised to defend that settlement. But one choice remained. Charles now had to decide whether accepting his wife's compromise meant surrendering to Philip or finally ending the war his family had carried for years. The battle over the palaces ended in that quiet room, but its meaning would be decided by how Charles faced his wife and how the outside world interpreted her surrender. By sunrise, the secret was no longer contained within palace walls. The country woke to a story unlike any royal dispute before it. A queen permitted to wear the crown, but forbidden to live inside the monarchy's most famous homes. The public did not see the trustees, the legal clauses, or the private tiers. They saw one unforgettable image: Camilla's car leaving Windsor as the iron gates closed behind her. Charles unfolded the morning newspaper and froze. Across the front page, the words, "Queen locked out," stood above the image already spreading across Britain. He folded the paper inward before Camilla entered, but the damage had been done. Palace officials had released a controlled statement confirming that she would continue all approved duties while keeping her primary private residence outside the principal crown properties. Crown properties were homes managed for the monarchy's official use, rather than personal possession, and the wording was designed to sound orderly. The public heard something colder. She could serve inside the palaces, but she could not live in them. Camilla understood that message the moment her car approached Windsor's Henry V gate. A small crowd had gathered, some silent, some calling her name, and one woman held a handwritten sign that read, "Duty does not need a bedroom." The Queen Consort looked directly at it, nodded once, and continued without lowering her gaze. She had agreed to give up the rooms, but she would not allow the world to mistake restraint for shame. The media divided within hours. Some commentators called the decree Philip's final defense of royal tradition. Others described it as a personal punishment, preserved beyond death. During an evening broadcast outside Buckingham Palace, a royal correspondent cited a documented palace account and revealed that the restriction had been drafted immediately after the disputed Windsor apartment incident. That disclosure transformed a private family wound into a national argument about power, memory, marriage, and who truly owned the symbols of the crown. Charles answered before the debate could spiral further. Through an official palace statement, he confirmed that Camilla would retain full ceremonial precedence, dedicated working offices, and her recognized place beside the sovereign. Ceremonial precedence meant her formal rank at state occasions would remain unchanged. At the same time, she would permanently accept Philip's prohibition against private residence inside the named palaces. Camilla read the statement in silence. It protected her title, but it also made the loss final. Charles then asked Anne, William, and his wife to return to Windsor. The meeting would not reopen the dispute. It would decide how the family remembered the decree, and whether Philip's final command would remain a weapon forever. The gates had closed before the world, yet inside Windsor, one final decision would determine whether Philip's decree remained a weapon, or became the boundary that finally ended the conflict. The final meeting ended where the conflict had begun, inside Windsor Castle. But this time there were no floor plans, no demands for private apartments, and no attempt to defeat the words of a man who was no longer there to defend them. Camilla entered without the decree in her hand. Charles stood beside her. Anne carried Philip's memorandum, while William arrived with the settlement that would close the matter forever. Camilla faced the decision without hesitation. She formally accepted that she would never establish private residential quarters in Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, Sandringham House, Balmoral Castle, or any other home protected by Philip's decree. The restriction was permanent. Yet Charles placed a separate family declaration before her, a written statement confirming her ceremonial status, official duties, staff support, and working offices. In simple terms, she would remain fully recognized beside the king, even though the palaces could never become her private homes. Charles signed first, then turned toward his wife. With no advisors present, he admitted that authorizing the enforcement order had been the hardest act of his reign. Camilla did not accuse him of choosing Philip over her. Instead, she told him that his failure had been silence. By saying so little, he had allowed her to believe she faced the humiliation alone. The monarch lowered his head and accepted the truth without defense. Anne placed Philip's memorandum inside its archive box and closed the lid carefully. An archive box was used to preserve important family records for the future, but this one carried more pain than history. The princess admitted that her father had written with certainty because he believed he was protecting the crown. Yet he never had to witness the human cost of his command. Camilla accepted the words without forgiveness and without renewed anger. That restraint ended the bitterness more powerfully than another argument could have done. William then gave the decree its final meaning. He declared that it would not be recorded as a judgment on Camilla's worth. Instead, it would stand as a permanent distinction between serving the crown and possessing its historic homes. The prince preserved Philip's boundary while protecting her dignity, and for the first time, both sides of the family could accept the same truth. Camilla reached into her handbag, removed the last Windsor key, and placed it beside the sealed memorandum. Her hand did not tremble. She told Charles that she would leave with her title, her marriage, and her dignity intact. Philip's decree protected the residences, but it did not erase her from royal life. She lost the right to call the palaces home, yet gained acceptance without ownership. Charles learned that love could not always overturn inheritance. Anne fulfilled her father's command. William preserved the boundary. The monarchy survived because personal desire finally surrendered to institutional duty. As Camilla walked through Windsor's gates, for the final time as a prospective resident, the doors closed behind her, not on her place beside Charles, but on the belief that a crown entitled anyone to possess the monarchy itself. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.